Not that far.
Yeah, not that far forward. The Rules Committee will come to order. We have almost a quorum. Actually, we've got a quorum. We've got a quorum now that Mr. Nugent has arrived. So we have a quorum present, and we say we're here for consideration of two measures from the Committee on Ways and Means, H.R. 674 and H.R. 2576, and we're happy to welcome the sponsor of the very, very important 3% withholding legislation, and my dear friend and California colleague, Mr. Herger. And I just saw the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Levin, on the floor, and he told me he was going to be coming up forthwith. And so since you're the author, let's begin with you. Without objection, your prepared statement will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Thank you, Chairman Dreyer, members of the committee. The legislation before you today is exactly the kind of bipartisan action on jobs that the American people have called upon Congress to pursue. H.R. 674 repeals a requirement that government agencies at all levels, federal, state, local, must withhold 3% of the payment for goods and services beginning at the end of next year. This 3% withholding tax affects a broad array of businesses, from manufacturers who supply body armor for our troops, to doctors who provide care to seniors on Medicare, to construction workers who repair roads and levees. Many of these businesses operate with profit margins of less than 3%, so the withholding tax will have a severe impact on their cash flow. That's why the prospect of this new tax is standing in the way of job creation. Permanently repealing the 3% withholding tax is a key step toward giving small businesses the certainty that it's safe to invest, grow, and hire more workers. In addition to its impact on small businesses, the 3% withholding tax will be costly for the government to implement. While the tax is officially scored as raising $11 billion in revenue for the federal government over the next decade, the Department of Defense has estimated that its own compliance costs would be $17 billion in the first 5 years, and that's just one of several dozen federal agencies. Similarly, thousands of cash-strapped state and local governments will have to pay higher prices for goods and services if this tax is not repealed. Much like the Form 1099 reporting requirements that Congress repealed earlier this year, the 3% withholding tax was intended to improve tax compliance. As with the 1099 rule, however, it's become clear that this policy was not well thought through and that there are better ways to stop tax cheats than imposing a costly new burden on the vast majority of law-abiding businesses. That's why a broad and diverse coalition of businesses and state and local governments have urged Congress to permanently repeal this tax. H.R. 674 has the support of nearly 270 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, and it passed the Ways and Means Committee by a unanimous voice vote. The Obama administration has also endorsed the repeal effort. This is an action Congress can take to create jobs right now, and I thank the committee for its consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herger, and thanks for the leadership you played on this. I see you introduced this legislation on February 11th, so it's been a while in coming, and glad that you've underscored the bipartisan nature of it. We're going to cover both pieces of legislation before us, the modified adjustment gross income measure that Ms. Black is here to testify on. So let's go to Mr. Levin, who can offer his thoughts on both measures.
Thank you. Nice to see
you.
We discussed the repeal of the 3% withholding bill, and it was supported by all of us. I think you know the history. It goes back to 2006. And as it's turned out, it was an unwise provision, and when we were in the majority, we approved a repeal of it. and ultimately the answer was to delay its effective date. So I very much support the repeal. Let me say just a few words about the pay-for, because I don't think there is a full understanding of this pay-for. What it does is to apply to those who take early retirement and the disabled, and to include in the calculation of eligibility their Social Security payments. What will happen under this, and I don't think it's fully understood, is that up to 500,000 people may well lose their coverage for health insurance. That is an estimate of CBO and the Joint Tax Committee. And the reason for it is that this is their estimate, 500,000 and 1 million will no longer be eligible for Medicaid, that approximately 500,000 will become eligible for tax credits under the ACA. And as I said, about 500,000, up to 500,000, will essentially become uninsured unless they were to receive coverage through their employer. So this is not a provision that is harmless in terms of the needs of a substantial number of people. So I urge, as we consider this, we understand the potential ramifications. I know there are differences of opinion on this, but I think as we vote, we should again understand the implications. Further, as you perhaps remember from your service on this committee, as you've seen tax bills, that there has been a hesitation on the part of the Ways and Means Committee to use provisions that relate to individuals to address the needs for action on business taxation provisions. So essentially what we're doing here is to use provisions relating to one sector to address a problem in another. And what I think makes this something that should be further thought through is that we're going to require some further action in the health field, for example, in terms of physician reimbursement. And so what we're using a pay-for now will take away the ability to use it relating to health care. I do think it's a misnomer to call this a jobs bill. There is a jobs bill presented by the President, and as you know, estimates are that it would add a couple percentage points to GDP and add a couple million jobs. That's Mark Zandi's estimate. And there is no way that this bill, in terms of that larger need, could or should be called job creation. So because of these, I want to present for your consideration an amendment in the nature of a substitute to pay for this, which I favor paying for and favor the enactment of the repeal. And that would take another provision relating to the business community and to eliminate the tax hole for the oil and gas industry. Some of you weren't here when we considered that years ago, but when we put forth Section 199, that deduction, it was for targeted domestic industries, and I think very mistakenly there was added provisions for oil and gas companies. And essentially what my substitute amendment would do would be to pay for this by repealing 199 for the large major integrated oil and gas companies. As a result, we would not add a dime to the deficit, and I really think that closing what is clearly a loophole, which never should have existed, is a better way than reducing health coverage, mostly for hardworking Americans or Americans who have been working hard. And so finally, I would ask the committee to make in order this amendment and to provide the necessary waivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off by first saying that my bill, H.R. 2576, is about fairness. This summer, when the Associated Press first reported that President Obama's health care law would allow middle-class Americans to become eligible for Medicaid, I was shocked. The Affordable Care Act's new income formula that determines eligibility for the government subsidy health insurance program, also known as the Modified Adjusted Gross Income, or MAGI, deviated from all federal assistance programs, failing to include Social Security benefits as income. Allow me to repeat that. The Affordability Care Act's income formula for Medicaid, CHIP, and exchange subsidies deviated from the eligibility requirements for all other federal assistance programs, notably supplemental Social Security income, supplemental nutrition assistance programs, or commonly known as food stamps, temporary assistance to needy families, low-income energy assistance programs, and public housing all include the entire Social Security benefit as income. Under the health care law, a married couple with an annual income of almost $60,000 could qualify to receive Medicaid benefits. And let me put it in more stark terms. Changing the income formula could result in individuals whose incomes are up to 400% of poverty level receiving Medicaid. This is unacceptable. I very strongly believe that it is our duty to ensure that the very scarce Medicaid resources are there for those in most need. Mr. Chairman, I am not the only one who thinks this. At the July the 14th Budget Committee hearing, I asked Mr. Richard Foster, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services Chief Actuary, about the income eligibility issue, and he said, and I quote, "I don't generally comment on pros and cons of policy, but that just doesn't make sense," close quote. Additionally, Richard Surian, HHS's Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, conceded that, and I quote here, "As a matter of law, some middle-income Americans may be receiving coverage through Medicaid, which is meant to serve only the neediest Americans," close quote. This legislation does have bipartisan support. In the Senate, in the Health, Education, Labor Committee, Ranking Member Mike Enzi has a companion bill, and my bill has passed out of Ways and Means by bipartisan support. President Obama himself recognizes the problem, and in his most recent debt reduction plan, explicitly proposes that the entire amount of Social Security benefits be included in the definition of income. This bipartisan solution would bring Medicaid back into line with other federal assistance programs and ensure that the program is there for those who are in most need. And furthermore, according to CBO and the Joint Tax Committee estimates, this bill would save taxpayers approximately $13 billion over 10 years. Considering our $14 trillion national debt, closing this loophole as soon as possible is a good policy on a number of levels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Black. Thanks to all of you for your dedicated work on this. And as all of you have underscored, this is bipartisan, and we obviously want to make sure that we can move ahead with this. And as you said, Mr. Levin, there are some different views as to whether this is a job-creating measure on the withholding issue. But I think that having the support of the administration as well as the support of Wally Herger, I mean, what a heck of a combination, Barack Obama and Wally Herger. I mean, I'll tell you, I mean,
Well, the administration doesn't consider this a job creation bill, but
well, I think that I do know that the president has been talking about job creation as a priority, and seen evidence of that. And so I'm sure that they don't believe that this is going to cost jobs. So I have no questions, but thank you all very much for being here and appreciate your work, Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here. I am supportive of what Wally and Diana are trying to do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for showing up also in support of this, and I'll be there to support Mr. Bryant as well. Thank you.
Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Herger, we understand from the Budget Committee that your bill violates the Congressional Budget Act, and as a result, your bill is subject to a number of points of order on the House floor. And I assume you're aware of these violations, so I'm asking you, are you asking the Rules Committee for a special waiver for your bill?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, with the Congressional, the Budget Committee provides us with
Could you be specific on what those are?
Section 303 changes revenues in a year for which there is no budget resolution, and Section 311 drops revenue levels below the revenue floor in the budget resolution, and none of the permissible adjustments to the floor contained in the budget resolution apply to this bill. So they cite two areas. So I'm assuming you're asking for a waiver for your bill.
I'm actually, Mr. McGovern, I'm not aware of that.
Well, I think
I'm not
if
asking
you don't
for a
ask for a
waiver.
waiver for your bill, that they'll be subject to a number of points of order on the floor.
Gentlemen, yield.
I yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I will say that if, in fact, this kind of waiver is required, it's for one reason only, and that is the fact that the United States Senate has failed to pass a budget. And so it may be necessary for us to take this action, but the fact that the other body hasn't been able to pass its budget is the reason that we'd have to do it. And I thank my friend for yielding.
I appreciate that explanation. So you will need a waiver for this bill. And as you just heard, Mr. Levin just submitted a proposal for which he is also seeking a waiver. And I guess my question is, if you're going to seek a waiver for your bill, would you also be in support of Mr. Levin getting a waiver so he can offer his substitute?
I'll let this committee determine that.
Mr. Levin, don't you think it would be unfair for there to be a waiver on one bill but not on the other bill, given the fact that you have an alternative way to pay for this?
Yes.
Well, we'll be trying to make sure that you get an opportunity, Mr. Levin, to be able to offer your amendment, your substitute on the floor. I don't think subsidies to big oil companies should be sacrosanct in this place. We've tried on a number of occasions to bring a vote to the floor on that. Every time we try to bring it up, the Rules Committee stops us. So, given the fact that, again, the majority needs a waiver for its bill, I hope that they would, out of fairness, give you a waiver so you can offer your substitute. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to especially thank Mr. Herger and Ms. Black for bringing these two good bills to us, and I have no questions. Thank you very much, and I appreciate Mr. Levin being here also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not clear on why we are considering a bill to pay for a measure that does not violate Cutco. And without asking the witnesses, maybe you can tell me, Mr. Chairman?
I don't understand exactly. So, to explain that further.
That this particular measure that we are considering, it has a pay-for measure in it, and that is likely to affect a number of people. And all I'm saying is, if left to its own devices, it does not violate Cutco, so why do we have a pay-for?
Well, there are two separate measures before us. One dealing with the modified adjusted gross income, the other dealing with the issue of 3% withholding.
Okay.
And I don't believe that either of them violate Cutco.
Okay. The offset, then, that are intended in this measure impacts the healthcare system, according to CBO, associated with 500,000 people. So Mr. Levin's measure says that, okay, why don't we ask the oil companies with no offense meant to them, they do have the ability from a standpoint of resources, as opposed to disabled and poor people that are likely to be affected. So I guess the question I have is it better for us to impact poor people than to ask, as Mr. Levin has, that if we're going to do this, and it may be reasonable to do, that we ask that all companies pay for it? What's unreasonable about that?
I understand that we're creating the law or adjusting this law, which was also recommended by the president in legislation that he had, so that we're treating all these areas together. That's my understanding. There's also a concern just in general of a time when the American public is hurting, not to do something that rather would lower their petroleum prices but would increase them.
Well, which is better?
So we have a preference of equalizing the law, I believe, with
But there are a lot of areas, not just contractors, where we could go after for tax violations in the system. But which is better, $5 billion of deficit reduction paid for by canceling handouts for the pretty profitable oil companies, or $2.6 billion in deficit reduction paid for by making the disabled and the poor pay more for health insurance and causing about 500,000 of them, according to CBO, not according to L.C. Hastings, but according to CBO, about 500,000 of them are going to lose their health coverage.
Well, Mr. Hastings, my understanding is this equalizing, that this is an inequity right now, that there's 6, whatever the number is you have, that are getting a deduction that are not getting it in other areas. So this is something that was proposed by the president also in some legislation he has.
Let me make it very clear, I'm very fond of putting the administration's policies in the record, and I ask all the time, and I will again, we do, that unanimous consent be had to introduce the administration's statement supporting both the policies that are here. It may come as a surprise to you that I disagree with the administration, and I've disagreed with previous administrations. Some of these measures have been offered by different measures. Here's where I think... Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here's where I think the rub is going to come, and that is when you all get to the dock fix, you're going to have to find some offsets somewhere. Now, are we going to go back into this arena for those offsets and cause people to lose health care coverage? Do you agree with me, firstly, that people are going to lose health care coverage when this measure becomes law?
Well, let me let the author of the legislation.
Well, Ms. Black doesn't know I went to Fisk University, so I have a little Tennessee in me as well. But anyway, Ms. Black, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hastings, and that is a very fine university. I'm proud to have it in Middle Tennessee, although it's not in my district.
Your district.
I have a great relationship with many folks there
Right.
at Fisk. And, sir, as Mr. Herger has already referenced, that this simply aligns the health care law with other means-tested programs, such as housing and food stamps and SSI. And so it's using the same standard for someone to qualify for those other federal assistance programs and making it equal. It really is a fairness issue. I know you referenced the CBO report, and the CBO report does indicate that a number of those people, because we are talking about a group of people that potentially are still working, will have health insurance from their employers. So again, this really does equalize and bring into equalization assistance in federal assistance programs.
Yes,
Yes,
I'll yield to Mr.
I
McCullough.
thank the Chairman. I think there's some controversy over the offset. I mean, it's clear, and we can debate that on the floor. But Mr. Levin has offered a substitute that I think is a reasonable substitute. I just want to point out to my colleagues that BP earned $4.9 billion in the third quarter of 2011. even though oil production fell by 12% over the same time period. So I guess the question is, for some of us, why is it that our friends on the Republican side continue to support subsidies to big oil companies when they continue to rake in billions of dollars in profits every year, and production is reduced? We think that we shouldn't be subsidizing that industry the way we do. They're doing pretty well. You want to, if there needs to be subsidies, there are a lot of middle-class families out there losing their homes, going to have a job. That's a better use of American U.S. tax dollars. So all we're simply saying here is we'd like you to help us, give the members of this chamber a choice. You have one way to pay for it. Mr. Levin has another way. We ought to allow the members of the House to work its will, and both initiatives be brought up. So I hope again that both of you would support Mr. Levin in his request just to make his substitute in order.
Could I just take
Yes,
You back.
thank you. Yield to Mr. Levin. I'll ask.
I just think we need to be careful. I know there's some difference of opinion about the pay for, but I think we need to be careful that we don't use a broad brush here, because they talk about equalizing, but a number of the people involved here are disabled. And to simply call this a program for the poor is a mistake.
Well, do you
And the
believe
same
that it
is
will-
true.
Do you believe that some people will lose health care coverage, as CBO says, Mr. Levin?
Yeah, I think CBO is correct that it will be up to 500,000, and it's joint tax as well as CBO. And for the reasons that I outlined, they're going to lose Medicaid coverage, and some will be eligible for a tax credit, but others will not be. And so their estimate is that we're talking about up to 500,000 who are going to either get coverage through an employer if that's possible, and in most cases it may not be,
In addition to that,
or they'll be uninsured.
in addition to that, the deficit measures reduction of same over the period of time. Do you feel that yours, meaning the oil amendment on the deficit, is more sustainable in terms of this particular measure, and CBO having scored that as well? Tell me if these statistics comport with your understanding. What CBO says is that the net effect of the Republicans' Maggi bill on the deficit will reduce the deficit by $2.6 billion over 5 years and reduce the deficit by $13 billion over 10 years. In your oil amendment, as scored, it will reduce the deficit by $5 billion over $5.3 billion over 5 years, and reduce the deficit by $12 billion over 10 years. So perhaps I'm being rhetorical, but it seems to me that somewhere along the line, the increase in the deficit is about $4 billion on your side, and I'm arguing, and will continue to argue to my colleagues here, that we give you the waiver that we are going to provide. So are those statistics in line with your understandings, Mr. Levin?
Yes. No, I think those figures are correct, and I think we have to remember there will be some deficit in terms of people losing health care coverage.
Well, that's unacceptable to me when there is...
Everybody can make up their own mind as to, I think it would be nice if we had an alternative.
All right. Thank you very much. I yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to understand better about folks losing the health insurance coverage, because I think that's an important point, and my two colleagues have made it well. But what I'm hearing, Ms. Black, from the administration is that it's not that there was intended a benefit for these 500,000 folks, but through call it, I don't know what you call it, well, I don't know if it was a drafting error or an oversight at the time or something that was missed, but that the administration is saying this was not the benefit that we intended, and so rather than 500,000 people, rather than 50,000 people losing their health insurance, it's that a benefit was given to folks that were never intended to receive it, and your bill corrects that error. Am I understanding that correctly?
I believe that is an appropriate way of also evaluating it. Yes.
Because I think that's an important distinction. I would ask my colleagues if they think I've interpreted that wrong, because there are going to be. We're in here. We're going to make a lot of decisions about how to curb 1.3 trillion in deficit spending. I happen to believe it ought to include an elimination of tax subsidies for oil companies. Mr. Levin and I support that through H.R. 25 and other proposals that I'm a supporter of. But for H.R. 25, and I, as I always do, ask for your co-sponsorship of that measure, not just to eliminate these subsidies, but all of these corporate subsidies, corporate welfare of any kind in the tax code, I believe we ought to be able to get rid of and can with H.R. 25, and I welcome that support. I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
Just to respond to your question about how it occurs, some have suggested that the definition of modified adjusted gross income in that Affordable Care Act that excludes the non-taxable Social Security benefits was a glitch. That would add hundreds of billions of dollars to the cost of the health care reform law. Now, however, the exclusion of non-taxable Social Security benefits is typical when applying income limitations to tax benefits, and we've done this before, and I believe that the CBO took this to account in determining its estimate.
Could I just briefly, I don't know who said it was correcting an error. You can say you should correct something that needs correction, but I don't think it was an error because, as Mr. Hastings has pointed out, the definition is uniformly used for tax provisions in the code. So I don't think it was an error, and this will change it for this purpose when there are other tax provisions that do not use this definition. And I think it isn't correcting an error in saying that people who were intended to be covered were covered out of error. But so I think, look, there are differences of opinion. I think we simply should look at the ramifications in terms of health care coverage in this country when we have today 55 million uninsured. I think that's the latest figure, and it's likely that a substantial number will be added to that group.
You raise an interesting point, Mr. Levin, the difference between the sets of rules we have for distributing benefits on the spending side of the ledger and the rules we have for distributing benefits on the tax side of the ledger. And if I could just, if I'm not out of school while I've got three Ways and Means Committee members here, if I could just discourage you from continuing to use the tax code as a mechanism for sending out revenues and return the tax code to only a mechanism for collecting revenues. Perhaps if we did all of this on the authorizing side of the ledger instead of the tax side of the ledger, we could avoid these kinds of inconsistencies in the future. And I know that's been a...
Let's argue that some other day. I mean, if we would need to take Section 199, which was expanded beyond its original intent. It was supposed to cover manufacturing, and it's been a valuable tool to assist manufacturing in this country. Oil and gas were never manufacturing, and it was added quietly, more or less at the last minute, over the opposition of a number of us.
I think
that's a bit of history.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thanks to the three of you for being here. We look forward to considering the measure on the floor. So that will conclude consideration of these two Ways and Means Committee measures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Dallas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant one rule for consideration of H.R. 2576 and H.R. 674, both under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate for H.R. 2576, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of H.R. 2576, provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in H.R. 2576. The rule provides one motion to recommit H.R. 2576. Rule provides for 1 hour debate on H.R. 674, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Ways and Means. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of H.R. 674. Rule provides that the amendment of 2 H.R. 674 printed in the Rules Committee report accompanying the resolutions shall be considered as adopted, and that the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions H.R. 674 as amended. Rule provides one motion to recommit H.R. 674 with or without instructions. Rule directs the clerk to, in the engrossment of H.R. 674, add to the text of H.R. 2576 as passed by the House a new matter at the end of H.R. 674 and to make technical and conforming changes. Finally, rule provides that upon the addition of the text of H.R. 2576 as passed by the House to the engrossment of H.R. 674, H.R. 2576 shall be laid upon the table.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Let me just say that we have before us an opportunity for a great bipartisan victory for both sides. The President has indicated, as Mr. Hastings has entered into the record, the Statement of Administration Policy, the strong support of the administration for both of these measures, and they do have, as I said, the strong support of the majority in the House as well. And I understand the concern that has been raised in the discussion about the issue of the waivers. As I said, the only reason that this waiver is being provided on the adjusted gross income measure is that we obviously have been awaiting passage of a budget from the Senate. That didn't work out, and that has put us into a position where we have no choice other than do this. The effort before us is an attempt to clear an opportunity for our friends to get this measure to the President's desk just as quickly as possible so that we can provide some much-needed relief. So are there any amendments to the rule?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule.
Mr. McGovern.
I move that the committee grant H.R. 674 and H.R. 2576 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the House floor, and we could maybe have a bipartisan support for the rule if you do that.
Thank you. You've heard the I suspect, I know that bipartisanship has existed on rules that have emanated from the Ways and Means Committee under both Democrats and Republicans, and that is we've had closed rules, and we all know the reason for that is that the notion of opening up the tax code is something that both parties have voiced concern about in the past. So I'm urging a no vote to Mr. McGovern's amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Madam Chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No. And the clerk report the total.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Levin, number 2, which would pay for the 3% bill by rolling back tax breaks for big oil companies instead of making it harder for people to get health care. And, Mr. Chairman, if I could just also say that if I'm understanding the Budget Committee's analysis correctly, we need waivers not only because of Section 303, which, as you correctly pointed out, is a Senate issue, but Section 311, which has nothing to do with the Senate, and this applies to the House-passed budget resolution. So, given the fact that we're giving waivers to this bill, and it's something that that this committee does on a regular basis, we waive Cutco, we waive germaneness rules, we waive all kinds of things. It just seems to me, out of fairness, that Mr. Levin ought to be able to have an opportunity to offer his substitute.
Thanks for your point of view on that. Okay, thank you very much. Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Pin the chair, the noes have it. The noes have the roll call. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No. Clerk, report the total.
2 yeas, 8 nays.
Further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pin the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Yes. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? Aye. Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Clerk, report the total.
8 yeas, 2 nays.
And the motion is agreed to. And the gentleman from North Charleston, Mr. Scott, will be managing this rule for the majority. And Mr. Hastings. Check with your staff. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.